Meditating on God's wisdom can transform our nights and ultimately our lives, says Janet Denison, author of the new 365 evening devotional, Wisdom Matters. We want to send you a copy of this powerful new resource to thank you for your donation to support this podcast and the other Christ-centered, culture-changing content at Denison Forum. You can get your copy of Wisdom Matters today at supportdf.org. Janet felt she was called by God to write a nighttime devotional to help people end their day with a thought about God and His wisdom. After all, wisdom is a gift from Him that enables His children to know how to filter and use all we learn for His higher purpose and our greater joy. So how about changing your nights and your life? Get your copy of Wisdom Matters while supplies last. Visit supportdf.org. Again, that's supportdf.org. You can also find the link in today's show notes.
Greetings. It's Tuesday, August the 20th, 2024. Welcome to the Daily Article Podcast. I'm Chris Elkins, narrating today's article written by Denison Forum co-founder and CEO, Dr. Jim Denison. If Joe Biden were his party's nominee for president this fall, he would be speaking at the Democratic National Convention on Thursday. Instead, that honor goes to Vice President Kamala Harris, while Mr. Biden addressed the gathering last night instead. Frequently interrupted by chants of "We love Joe," he pointed to his joint accomplishments with Mrs. Harris as he passed the torch to her. Have Democrats been unfair to the president? He won his party's nomination through its primary process, then resigned from the race on July the 21st. According to Robert Draper's in-depth New York Times profile, he still feels anger and hurt towards party leaders who discouraged him from seeking re-election. Said negatively, his political allies supported him so long as he was a means to the end of keeping the White House, then turned on him when they felt he could no longer serve this purpose. Said positively, politicians must be elected if they are to serve. If, as Democratic Party leaders believe, their platform best meets the needs of the nation, it needs to gain power to do so. Running candidates who are most likely to win is a necessary means to this end. Lest you think I'm being partisan, the same is true on the Republican side. Donald Trump was widely disliked in his party until it became clear that he would win the nomination in 2016. Over the years since, many of his political opponents have become his supporters. The same positive-negative calculus is in play. I often cite the work of sociologist James Davison Hunter, whom I consider the leading evangelical interpreter of culture today. In his new book, Democracy and Solidarity, on the cultural roots of America's political crisis, he argues that America was formed within the tension between Enlightenment values, a belief in individual reason, deliberation, and neutral social institutions, and religious faith. As New York Times columnist David Brooks notes in his response to Hunter's work, quote, "The Bible gave generations of Americans a bedrock set of moral values, the conviction that we live within an objective moral order, the faith that the arc of history bends towards justice. Religious fervor drove many of our social movements, like abolitionism." End quote. However, as Hunter reports, America began growing less religious in the 1960s and started privatizing religious beliefs as a result. In response, American public life grew largely secular, especially among the highly educated classes. Moral relativism then supplanted religious doctrine. How's this working for us? The so-called sexual revolution of the era, coupled with the advent of birth control, soon spawned the normalization of no-fault divorce, pornography, homosexuality, and abortion. Same-sex marriage and society-wide LGBTQ advocacy followed, along with growing support for polygamy and euthanasia. What these issues have in common is that they commodify people. Birth control enables unmarried people to have sex even with strangers with less fear of pregnancy, even though God created sex as a celebration of marital intimacy and childbearing, as we learn from Genesis 2, verses 23 through 25. No-fault divorce and polygamy undermine the relational unconditionality that God intends to characterize marriage, referencing Genesis 2, verse 24. Pornography obviously objectifies the bodies of others for selfish pleasure. LGBTQ advocacy labels people by perceived gender and sexual orientation rather than calling them to address their identity with biblical truth and morality. Abortion treats preborn children as objects to be killed and removed from their mother's body as she wishes, even though God considers them sacred, referencing Psalm 139, verse 16, and Jeremiah 1, verse 5, from the moment of their conception. Euthanasia values life only to the degree that it serves utilitarian purposes to the individual or to society at large. As you can see, making people a means to our ends is not limited to political parties. From Cain and Abel to today, it's a symptom of our fallen nature and drive to be our own God, as revealed in Genesis 3, verse 5. As the old gospel song says, loving things and using people only leads to misery. If our society is ever to move past the commodification and transactionalism that dominates our relationships, we will need a source beyond ourselves. We will need the power to choose love over lust, sacrifice over selfishness, forgiveness over revenge. The good news found in Romans 8:29 is that Jesus, the one person in all of human history who most exemplified such attributes, can recreate us in his image. From Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23, we know that his Spirit can manifest the fruit of his character in us: his love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. How? 1. Settle for nothing less than Christ-likeness. As he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. 1 Peter 1, verse 15. 2. Practice the presence of Christ through your day. Read and memorize Scripture. Express gratitude for his gifts. Pray for your needs. Imagine yourself in his presence since you are. Matthew 28:20. From Ephesians 5:18, submit each day to his Spirit, asking him to make you more like your Lord than you've ever been. C.S. Lewis noted, the Christian does not think God will love us because we are good, but that God will make us good because he loves us. How deeply do you want God to make you good today? We're grateful for our podcast listeners. If you find the Daily Article podcast helps you better understand today's news and cultural issues and then respond biblically, please rate and review the Daily Article podcast on the platform from which you subscribe. That helps people find and follow the Daily Article podcast.